So I'd like to move things along and go to our next panel. And it's an important panel, it's an important discussion. And I hope that each of you will interact, will take questions and answers at the end of the panel. But it's a discussion that we need to have as conservatives, as women, as voters, and that's minority outreach. And whether, doing minority outreach is actually outreach, or whether it's, playing politics and pandering. So we're going to have an honest discussion about that, and I'd like to invite our panel up, Kira Davis, who's going to moderate, Britteny Morrett, and Adrienne Ross.
Ready to change the world?
Yeah. Yes.
Or at least get buzzed for a little bit. All right, well, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys at Smart Girl. My name is Kira Davis. As Stacy said, I'm a video blogger. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I'm a semi-retired actress. I haven't been involved in politics all that long, like Stacy and Terry, but I've always been a political junkie. And after the 2008 elections, I thought, I'm so ticked off about how stuff is going. I've got to get in the game in some way. And just kind of started writing and doing videos, and had a couple of videos that went viral. And it's just progressed from there. But my passion is for economic freedom, especially in the Black community. For those of you that are from this area in Indiana, I'm from Gary. And so I spent a lot of years there in the community, working in the community, and that's really where my politics changed, because I saw all of the policies that I have supported my whole life. I got to see how they actually worked, because I was working in nonprofit and running an after-school program. I got to see how they actually worked, and I realized they don't work. And I thought, we've got to do something. The Black community is really suffering because of all of these false promises. So that's really where my passion lies. I'm very privileged to be with these amazing women here. And let's just go ahead and introduce our panel today. We have Britteny Morrett with us. Britteny received her BA in Middle East Studies from George Washington University and is currently the Youth Projects Manager at the Libra Initiative, where she promotes economic freedom to the U.S. Hispanic community. Named one of Huffington Post's top 50 Latino voices on Twitter, Britteny has been published by outlets from NBC Latino to the Daily Caller to The Guardian. She runs a weekly radio show called Voces Latino. Outside of politics, Britteny enjoys participating in dance competitions, going to the gun range, and outdoor activities like camping. She also wrestles bears in her spare time. No, I just not okay. Adrienne Ross is a 17-year public school English language arts teacher in upstate New York, a blogger and political neophyte. A late political bloomer, she awakened during the 2008 campaign. She is the sole creator, editor, and publisher of MotivationTruth.com and an editor and writer for conservatives for Palin.com. As both an American and a Christian, Adrienne believes she's been called to use her voice to address issues facing the country and to support others who have been called for such a time as this. Adrienne believes the only things that should ever be truly banned in this country are small children and puppies. Yeah, I made that up too. All right, so ladies, let's get started. Minority outreach, pandering or not? I have a couple of questions to get started. I'll ask each of you to respond, and then we'll go to the audience and see what questions all of these people have. So, if you have a word of advice to start, if you have a word of advice for the GOP in reaching minority voters, what would it be? Brittany, let's start with you.
If I was talking to GOP leadership, the message that I would talk about would actually be the marketing and the rhetoric. I don't think there's anything wrong with our principles. Thank you. There's nothing wrong with conservative principles, and we don't need to change our principles. However, the way we market it is something that we need to do better with. If I was talking to the GOP members, grassroots activists, I would say the first step is actually showing up. A lot of times when I go into these communities, I hear, well, I've never met a Republican. I've never met a conservative. And so we actually need to show up before we can start that dialogue.
Hello. I also agree. I agree with Brittany. The message is it's the right message. we have to do a better job of how we articulate that message. I think the GOP has a tendency to look at the situation as our message is right for all of America. And therefore we don't need to reach out to specific groups of people, or to use the word target as we're using today. And I used to agree with that. You know, it's the right message, but I've come to see that if the conservative message is right for America, it's downright essential, in particular for the Black community, because of the unique needs that we have. And I think that we have to get beyond that place where we feel uncomfortable reaching out. Black families, Hispanic families, Asian families, they care as much about their children, they care as much about education. We have got to reach. Unemployment is a major issue, and if we truly believe that we have the message that can set some captives free, then we need to take that message. We need to not be afraid, we need to step out, and we need to target. It's not just about votes, it's about believing that our message has value and taking the message to people. That's my advice.
No, that's good. I want to piggyback on that. I think something you said was very interesting. You said we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And I think that's what's difficult for a lot of people. But getting back to something you said, Brittany, as well, you said, you know, you both kind of said this, we need to think more about marketing, how we market the message, but is marketing not pandering? I mean, when you're talking about the GOP having like a specific director of African American communications, is that more just kind of, pandering is the best word, or is it something that's necessary?
So I would say that it's something that's necessary, and one of the examples that I always use would be, imagine you're a car salesman, and you need to get rid of a Mustang convertible, and you have two customers come up. One is an 18-year-old Hispanic boy from Miami, Florida, and another one is, say, a 67-year-old white woman from Omaha, Nebraska. Same car, same product, it's not changing. But how you sell it, how you market it, might be different. You're going to appeal to different frames of reference. That's what we're essentially talking about here, is we're not trying to change the principles of limited government, economic freedom, family values. It's just appealing to the different frames of reference that come with having a different culture, or being a woman as opposed to being a man. So that's really, I don't consider that pandering, I consider that being smart.
And I don't think that the GOP needs to go into the Black community and say, hey, I'm here to offer you this, that, and the other thing. I'm here for the Black community. I think as a teacher, one of the things I've often said is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so if you go caring and you bring a message that people need, then you bring the message. I mean, I don't have to come and say I'm here to save the Black community. But I mean, if you look into the Black community, you think about the Black church, for example. I mean, lots of people are very active. Go where they are. Again, step out of your comfort zone. Go where they are and talk about the things that matter to people. And I believe it all comes down to building relationships with people. It's about building trust. No one's going to listen to you if they don't first trust you. And you know, Black people, you know, we may not trust you for longer. You know, we may be a little bit more skeptical. But the point is, do you believe in the message enough to step out of your comfort zone and understand that there's a need? And if we don't reach out, then we continue in the same cycle, and we need to get out of the cycle.
I couldn't agree more. And I think you ladies make two very excellent points. And I think you hit on something, Adrienne, about developing relationships in the community. And I get asked, I'm sure you do too, get asked this question all the time. How do we reach, our minority community? You build relationships. Freedom is a slow burn, and that is the disadvantage we have as conservatives. It's not emotional. It is not like perfectly packaged for the Saturday night movie on HBO. There's a lot of work and responsibility that goes into freedom. It's a hard sell, and it takes a while to spread. You can't, a liberal can go out there and say, reproductive rights for everyone, and everyone's like, yeah, cool, who could be against rights, And it inflames the emotions. But as conservatives, of course, we're a little more practical. We understand the framework of society and how to work within that, but it's harder to sell. And the way you sell it is by getting into these communities. Volunteer somewhere. I used to run an after-school program in Gary, and I'll tell you, I could find money when I needed it. I can go to people who will give money. What I couldn't find was time. I couldn't find people who would give their time. And I used to have a couple of white folks that would come in and volunteer, and the kids hated them at first. We were all black, I had all black kids. They hated those people at first. They were so skeptical. But these were young college students that came in, and they won the kids over, not by preaching at them, but just by showing up, by being there every day. So that's a huge, I think, a huge part of the message. What do you think the GOP is doing wrong right now in terms of minority outreach?
Saying the GOP is kind of a broad stroke. Just some basic examples, and I say this as someone who in my free time, I run a Young Republicans chapter. But something that always bothers me is that we have a lot of focus on networking events and happy hour events, and we're not actually spending our time getting into the communities. And a point that you made that was so great is that people need to trust us. They can't trust us if they don't know us. And so instead of having so many happy hours and kind of just these, getting and sitting and talking to each other in this echo chamber, we need to actually spend our time getting out. And even if you're just volunteering at a homeless shelter, or even if you're going to a women's crisis center, you're making so much more of a difference and an impact in those lives and giving such a better image to our movement than just being like, oh yeah, it's Monday, so 6 o'clock happy hour at, the pub on the corner. So that's, again, it's about showing up, and we're not showing up right now. That's just the fact of the matter, is that we aren't showing up. We're completely absent in these communities, and we are about, just estimating, about 40 years behind on the ground game of being in these communities. I always challenge anyone, can you name a nationwide organization like, for example, La Raza, that is conservative?
No, we can't.
Because there are none. We don't have the organizations that the left have. They have multi-million-dollar budgets. They have organizations from Planned Parenthood to La Raza, whatever, in these communities on a day-to-day basis, and we have nothing on our side.
Don't you think a part of that is just that, like you said earlier, we're very loath to divide ourselves, whereas liberals and Democrats are, they're really into identity politics, and we so look down on identity politics that it's distasteful to us, generally speaking, to do something like that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think that's actually initially one of the things that drew me to the conservative movement is there is such an emphasis on true equality. And that is what I like. However, it's becoming a hindrance, as you said earlier, when we're like, well, our message is freedom, that should speak for itself, and everyone should understand that equally. And so what we're finding is that the tactics on the left are working. Going in and actually, having these organizations, that's working. And if we continue down the path that we're doing now, the GOP is going to become a regional party. By 2050, 1/3 of US adults are going to be Hispanic. 1 in every 4 children being born in the United States right now is Hispanic. If voting trends continue with 70+% of Hispanics voting Democrat, you guys can do the math. So something needs to be done.
I'll just share a little bit of my own story. I mean, as you said, political neophyte here. And growing up, I hated politics. I had no interest whatsoever. I grew up in a family of Democrats. And the only thing I knew about either party was Black people were supposed to be Democrats. And, Republicans only cared about rich white people. I don't remember anyone ever sitting me down and telling me that that was the truth. I just know that that was the truth for me. And that's the perception out there. And I think, again, because we don't want to divide people along those lines, and so we shy away. It seems that whenever the issue of race comes up, we're always the ones with our backs against the wall. We're never on offense. And it's a shame, because when you look at history between the two parties, I mean, we should be bold because we have history on our side. And yet we don't want to step over, and we don't want to reach out because we feel that, well, that's not important, we have the message. And so, again, it comes back to messaging. We have the message, no question about it. Are we willing to articulate that message? Are we willing to go on the offense instead of just, having our backs against the wall? And again, the left, they're very, very good at it. And we also have to be relatable. And we come across, this last election, when our candidate didn't quite come across as someone who we could relate to, and then when you're caught on tape talking about those people who feel entitled, it doesn't help any. And so we have a lot of work to do about getting out in front of and not always being on the defense. And right now, I feel that's where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure. I think it was Shelby Steele who said after the election, Black people, I don't know how this would apply to the Hispanic community, but I know the Black community speaks the language of race. And as distasteful as we may find that, it's just a reality. And so sometimes as a Black person, I will hear people say, my white brothers and sisters say, when I look at you, I don't see color, I just see you. I see you for who you are. And I love that because I know that what you're saying is, I'm judging you by the content of your character, but I don't want you to be afraid to see me as a Black woman, because that is a part of who I am. It has shaped my experiences, and sometimes Black people who don't understand the message of freedom and conservatism hear you saying, I don't care about you, when you're saying, I don't care about your color. I don't care about your culture. Our race is very tied to our culture, so this is something to keep in mind. How are we doing on time here? Stacy, what?
We're fine.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you ladies one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys for some Q&A. What are the messages voters in your respective racial communities seem to respond to the most?
So it's no secret, immigration is kind of a hot button issue right now. And that's something that everyone is talking about. I would say probably what I'm seeing on the ground, and this isn't too far from the polling, the top 3 issues in the Hispanic community right now are, in no particular order, education, healthcare, and immigration. And I guess unemployment, Hispanic unemployment is disproportionately high as it is in the Black community. As far as the messaging, I know immigration is an emotional topic, and it's tied to a lot of other issues. However, I find that the rhetoric surrounding immigration, regardless of where you stand, that I'm not as particularly concerned about at this point, is becoming very toxic, and to the point where it's a non-starter. And so when they hear what they perceive as "get off my lawn" type rhetoric, it shuts down the conversation with a lot of other topics. And so Hispanics, especially if you look at the trends over the years, they tend to, go back and forth, sway between the two movements. George W. Bush did great with Hispanics. Right now, we're seeing a trend much more to the left, and a lot of it is because of the rhetoric surrounding immigration. And even it's getting to the point where I'm finding conservative Hispanics are feeling uncomfortable with the rhetoric surrounding immigration. So by no means am I saying that we should have open borders and, whatever. I'm saying when you're articulating your points, and when we as a movement are articulating our points, and very valid points about border security, and about limited government, and about privacy, that we just need to make sure that we're doing this in a way that isn't going to be so off-putting that it turns them away from the Republican Party overall. As far as education, school choice is a home run with Hispanics right now. We should completely be on the offense with school choice. If you look at Wisconsin, they're doing a lot of great things with school choice, and Hispanics overwhelmingly are favoring it in the polls. And you said earlier, we play defense too much. There's a quote that I love from General Patton, and it's, nothing was ever successfully defended. There's only attack, attack, and attack. And that's what we need to be doing on these issues.
I just want to piggyback on something you said in terms of, as a teacher, school choice is such an important issue, and I guess sometimes people are surprised as a public school teacher that I would speak on that, but I'm there every day and I see what's going on, and that is something that, again, matters to no matter who, whatever the demographic is. People care about their children, and President Obama, he came in and where the DC voucher program, for example, was working, and parents were satisfied with that. And yet, you shut it down, and that's an issue that matters to people. But what I hear from people, again, it's the messaging. I hear a lot of people, when you talk about immigration, for example, they see that as, again, the Republicans being racist, wanting to shut certain people out. I've had conversations with people about that. And the economy is obviously a very important issue. Unemployment is a very important issue. But it seems that with President Obama, the coolness factor, the hip factor, seems to have had more weight with people than even their current circumstances. Being willing to give him another shot even though economically they're not doing well, even though his policies don't seem to be doing well, it just seems as if they trust him, or if they don't think that he's doing a good job, they like him. And that cool thing. And I don't understand that, like him. What's the, I don't care to like you. I just want you to, I'm not here to like you. You're here to run the country, and you're here to move us forward. I'm not gonna sit down and hang out with you, But that matters to people. And then when you add to that the fact that he comes across as relatable, and we don't, and we're not messaging it well, it is a bad combination, and so I think I agree with you, those issues that are important, but how are we going to articulate them, and how are we going to get past the coolness and the racist needs that.
Oh, yeah, very good points. I think one of the things that your comments remind me of is something I have to remind myself of a lot, is that it's important to always operate from a place of love instead of anger. It's really easy to be angry. There's a lot of stuff to be angry about, so I certainly don't fault anyone for being, pissed a lot of the time, but all of it's rooted in our love of this country and the freedom that we have. And so when you are talking to Hispanic voters about immigration, and it's a sensitive issue, and you have, I have very clear feeling as an immigrant, I'm a Canadian immigrant, as an immigrant, a legal immigrant myself, I have very specific, passionate feelings about the issue. But I can't start a conversation with somebody with the, like you say, the get off my lawn attitude, because my opinions aren't based on what's fair and what's not. My opinions are based on what I love about this country and what I love about what this country offers people like you and me. And so don't forget, when you're talking to people, that's where you need to start with. You need to start from the place of love. And the coolness factor thing, a couple of friends and I have this conversation over and over again about conservatives in the arts, and I get asked this question all the time by groups that I speak to. What can we do to affect the culture to change this idea of, look, Democrats are cool, and then everybody else is not cool. And I was like, and one of my things that I always say is, stop raising politicians and let your kids be musicians and actors and writers and producers, because like Andrew Breitbart always said, politics is downstream of culture. It's the culture that affects the politics. So don't be afraid to let your kids grow up and be a part of the culture, but having those great traditional values of freedom. And they'll bring that into the work. It doesn't have to be literal. They'll bring it into the work that they do. So that's how we battle that coolness factor. Yeah, we don't look cool right now because we don't have a lot of people that do cool stuff. Politics is fun, but it's not very cool, So that's one thing. All right, let's go to the audience. Does anyone have a question for our esteemed panelists? Raise your hand if you have a question.